The fluorescent lights of the maternity ward at St. Catherine's Hospital hummed at a frequency that had burrowed into Elena Marsh's skull over the past 72 hours. Not loud, just constant. The kind of sound that replaced thought, that filled the spaces where sleep should have been. She stood at the nursery window with her forehead pressed against the glass and watched her daughter sleep. 3 days old, 7 pounds 4 ounces, dark hair that curled slightly at the temples, fingers so small they looked like something sculpted, not grown. The small plastic bracelet on her wrist read, Lily Marie Marsh, born December 4th, 2024. Mother, Elena Marsh. The space for father was blank. The antiseptic smell of the corridor mixed with the last traces of newborn scent still clinging to her hospital gown, and she breathed it in deliberately, the way a person memorizes something they know they are about to lose. The heating system clicked and groaned through the walls. Somewhere down the hall, television played morning news at low volume. The world continued its ordinary motion, completely indifferent to the fact that Elena Marsh's entire life had contracted to the size of a glass window and the sleeping child behind it. She had not opened her phone in 2 days. The bills had started arriving before Lily was even born. Medical pre-authorization notices, insurance rejection, letters account, overdraft alerts. She had read the first several with the careful attention of someone who still believed the numbers could be negotiated. Then she had stopped reading. There was a point at which information stopped being useful and became purely punishing. And Elena had reached that point somewhere around the second trimester when Colin had still been there. When she had still believed that two people could figure out the math together, Colin Ashford. Even thinking his name required a particular kind of bracing, the way you brace before stepping into cold water. You knew what was coming, you stepped in anyway. 14 months. That was how long she had known him. 14 months of Sunday mornings and inside jokes and a future that had felt for the first time in her adult life like something she was allowed to want. He had been warm in the way that certain people are warm, the kind of warmth that feels chosen, specific, like they have selected you out of all the available options and decided that you are worth the effort. He cooked. He remembered the names of her coworkers. He held her through the night when her mother's last hospitalization stretched into weeks. She had told him about the pregnancy on a Tuesday in March. He had smiled, said all the right things, held her hand across the kitchen table of her apartment while rain moved through the streets outside. 4 days later, he was gone. Not a fight, not an argument, not even a note, just gone. And with him, $20,000 from the savings account she had been building for 6 years, $1,200 a month, set aside from her waitressing shifts accumulated across years of skipped vacations and secondhand furniture, and the particular discipline of someone who grew up with very little and had decided quietly and without announcement that she would not always live that way. $20,000 in Colin Ashford, both gone. Same morning, same Tuesday bank withdrawal timestamp at 6:47 in the morning that she had looked at so many times she could see it when she closed her eyes. The nurse Maria appeared beside her with the practiced quiet of someone who had spent decades moving through difficult moments without making them worse. She was older, somewhere past 60, with gray-streaked hair, pinned back and reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck. She is beautiful, honey. You should rest. Elena nodded without turning her head. She would rest. She would figure it out. She always had eventually. Her phone buzzed in the pocket of her hospital gown. She pulled it out. Battery at 5%. A notification from her bank, which she dismissed without reading, and then a text from her former coworker Sarah asking how she was doing. Elena stared at Sarah's name for a moment. She typed and deleted 3 different responses. She wanted a picture of the bracelet. It was an odd impulse, the kind that arrives without warning in exhausted minds. The small plastic hospital band on Lily's wrist, the official record of her daughter's existence in the world. Elena wanted it documented somewhere, backed up, real in a way that went beyond memory. She raised her phone and took the picture through the glass. The image came out better than expected, given the reflection and the distance. Lily's face turned slightly to one side, fingers near her chin, and the bracelet clearly visible. Battery at 4%. She needed to send this somewhere, Babone. Her mother had died 2 years ago, and Elena had no siblings. Her phone contacts had thinned considerably in the months since Colin's disappearance. She scrolled for Sarah's name. Her hands were still unsteady from the epidural's residual effects. The contacts blurred slightly. She found a name, tapped it, and the message sent before she could confirm the screen. For one moment, she stood very still. Then she looked at what she had done. The message had gone to a contact saved as MW. Two initials, no name. She had no idea who MW was. A misdial she had saved by accident. Some stranger would see, it'd be confused, delete it, move on. She blocked the number immediately and went to find a charger. The discharge process the following morning took 4 hours and required signatures on 43 separate documents. Nurse Maria tried twice to convince her to stay another night. Elena declined both times with the steady politeness of someone who has become accustomed to declining things she needs. She could not afford another night. The bus home was cold and smelled like wet coats. Elena sat in the back with Lily bundled against her chest in the carrier she had bought secondhand and watched Chicago move past the windows in the pale December light. 4 flights of stairs, no elevator. She made it. Her arms ached. The apartment smelled like mildew and the particular staleness of a space that has not had a window opened in weeks. She set Lily carefully in the second-hand bassinet and plugged in her phone. It came back to life with the Apple logo climbed to 17% or 18, and then the notifications began arriving in a cascade that made her step back from the counter. 43 missed calls, all from different numbers she did not recognize. 27 text messages, same situation. Elena opened the first one. You can't hide from this. She opened the second. We need to talk. It is important. The third, check your door. She went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the apartment's inadequate heating. She crossed the room in socked feet and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. She looked down. A white envelope lay on her doormat. Thick paper, cream-colored. The kind of envelope that announced its own expense through texture alone. She opened the doors just long enough to snatch it, pulled it shut, engaged all 3 locks. Inside the envelope was a single card, black stock, with silver lettering. Tomorrow noon. Caldwell's. Come alone. And below that one letter. Our Elena sat down on the floor with her back against the door and read the card 3 times. Caldwell's. She knew the name. Everyone in Chicago knew the name. It existed in the city's consciousness without existing in any tourist guide mentioned in passing by journalists who chose their words carefully referenced obliquely in the kind of business coverage that described outcomes without describing methods. She Googled it. The images that loaded made her stomach tighten. Marble, crystal. One profile piece from 3 years ago described it as where Chicago's real decisions get made. This was not a wrong number situation. Whoever MW was, they had seen something in that photograph. In a hospital bracelet. In her daughter's name and birth date, in the name of an attending physician. And whatever they had seen had been significant enough to mobilize people to fill her phone with calls from numbers that did not exist in any directory to place a hand-delivered envelope outside her 4th-floor apartment in a building where the elevator did not work. She did not sleep. She fed Lily at 2 and again at 4:30 and lay in the dark between feedings listening to every sound the building made. By 6 in the morning, she had made the decision she had probably made the moment she read the card. She would go, not because she was brave, because the alternative was staying in this apartment, knowing that whoever had sent that envelope knew where she lived and waiting for something she could not predict or prepare for. At least at Caldwell's, she would see the face. She changed clothes 4 times. Everything she owned had the faint apology of things that have been washed too many times in too hot water. She settled on the black dress from her mother's funeral, which was too large on her now, but was clean. Lily would have to come. There was no one to leave her with. The bus downtown took 40 minutes. Elena sat in the back and held Lily against her chest and watched the city change outside the window. The architecture shifting upward and the streets widening. The people on the sidewalks wearing coats that fit differently than the coats in her neighborhood. Caldwell's occupied the ground floor of a building that looked like it had been carved from a single pale stone white and slightly luminous in the December midday light. Tall windows, no sign. A man in a black suit stood at the entrance with the particular stillness of someone who had been trained to stand still. Elena climbed the 3 steps. Your name, he said, not a question. Elena Marsh. He touched his ear, murmured something inaudible, waited. Then he nodded once and pulled the door open. 2nd floor, private dining room. Elevator is straight ahead. The interior was everything the photographs had promised and several things they had not. The floors were marble pale gray veined with white. A chandelier hung in the center of the room, enormous and still like a frozen explosion of crystal and light. The air smelled like money and roses. A woman in a white shirt appeared at her elbow with a smile that was professional and precise and contained in no warmth whatsoever. This way, Ms. Marsh. She did not wait for confirmation. Elena followed her to a glass elevator at the back of the room, stepped inside, and rose in silence to the second floor. The hallway was paneled in dark wood hung with paintings that had the particular gravity of things that are very old and very expensive. Last door on the right, the woman said, and stepped back into the elevator. Elena stood alone in the hallway. The door at the end waited. She walked toward it the way you walk towards something you have decided to do before you can talk yourself out of it. The handle was cold and heavy. She pushed the door open. The room was smaller than she had expected. Intimate, a single table set for two white linen crystal glasses silverware that caught the light from a window overlooking the Chicago skyline. The city spread below in its winter clarity towers and streets and the gray gleam of the lake in the distance. There was a man standing at the window. His back was to her. Everything in Elena's body registered him before her mind had processed a single specific detail. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark suit that had clearly been made for him specifically. His hair was dark cut short, but with enough length at the top to suggest it was maintained rather than cropped. His hands were in his pockets. His posture was the posture of someone who has never in their adult life been uncertain about whether they belonged in a room. He did not turn around immediately. "Close the door," he said. His voice landed in the room with the weight of something that had never in its life been ignored. Deep, smooth American, but with some older architecture underneath it, the particular cadence of someone educated in two languages and fluent in both. Elena closed the door. The click sounded too loud. Lily stirred a small sound of waking discomfort. Elena shifted her in the carrier automatically and kept her eyes on the man's back. He turned. Elena had braced herself for something. What she got was a face that belonged in a different category entirely. Mid-30s at most, sharp jaw, high cheekbones, a mouth that managed to look both cruel and precise at the same time. His eyes were dark, nearly black, and when they found her, they moved across her face and then down to Lily with a speed that was clinical and a quality that was something else entirely. Something shifted in him. His shoulders locked, his jaw tightened by a fraction. Something crossed his face too quickly to name, but it was real and involuntary, the kind of response that bypasses training. He looked at Lily the way people look at something they were not prepared to see. "Sit," he said, gesturing toward the table. Elena looked at the chair, then back at him. "I prefer to stand." His lips moved in something that was not quite a smile, more like the acknowledgement of a point scored. "Then stand," he said. He moved to the table himself, pulled out a chair, and sat with the fluid economy of someone who does not waste motion. "And the baby," he said. "She has a name," Elena said. "Her name is Lily." He paused, repeated it quietly as though testing the weight of it. "Lily." Then he looked up at Elena. "What do you want?" she said. "Why am I here? What is this?" He leaned back slightly. The silence he allowed before speaking was the silence of someone who has never had to rush. "The photograph you sent," he said. "The bracelet. I need you to tell me where you took it." "St. Catherine's, the maternity ward. I already told you this." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a phone, set it on the table, turned it to face her. It was her photograph, but it had been processed somehow, enhanced, enlarged, and clarified until certain details she had never noticed were clearly visible. He pointed to a line of text near the bottom of the bracelet. "Attending physician," and below the physician's name, a staff credential number. "Dr. C. Ashford," he said. "Do you know that name?" The room tilted slightly. Elena put one hand on the back of the empty chair. "Colin," she said. But Colin was not a doctor. He worked in medical device sales. He told me he worked in medical device sales. He used a great many aliases, the man said. His voice had gone quieter. Not softer, but more precise. Colin Ashford is the name he used when he needed hospital access. Staff credentials can be purchased if you know the right people. He used them to move through certain institutions without triggering the kind of attention that outside visitors attract. She stared at the photograph, at the name she had never read on the bracelet of her own daughter. 7 months ago, the man said someone using that identity and three others accessed accounts connected to my organization and removed $2.1 million in cash. Then he disappeared. His eyes met hers and held them without apology. You are the last person in this city who had sustained contact with him before he vanished. You and that child. She looked up from the phone. What is your name? She said. He considered the question as though it had more than one answer. Dante Reeve. She had heard the name. It existed in the city the way certain names exist, spoken carefully by people who understood what careful speech was for. She knew standing in this room that she had walked in here with almost no information about what she was walking into, and that she now had slightly more, and that slightly more was not better. There is something else, he said. He reached for the phone again, scrolled, and placed it back in front of her. A different image this time, not her photograph, but a document, a family record of some kind. He pointed to a name near the top. Rosalind Reeve, he said. My father's sister. She left in 1994. Changed her surname when she arrived in the United States. She chose Marsh. Elena heard the words. They arranged themselves into a sentence. The sentence did not make sense, and then it made complete sense, and the two states existed simultaneously for several seconds. My mother's name was Rosalind Marsh, Elena said. Yes, she was born in Florence. Yes, she came to the United States. 1994, he said. Late 1994. She altered the timeline slightly when she told the story. Safer that way. He looked at Elena steadily, not unkindly, but without the softening she might have appreciated. Which means that you are her daughter, which means that Lily is family. Elena's hand tightened on the back of the chair. He continued, I understand this is a significant amount of information to receive in a short period of time. I am not asking you to accept it immediately, but I need you to understand why that photograph was significant to me, why the name on that bracelet, the surname Marsh, why it required me to respond the way I did. I am not going to pretend I understand any of this, she said, but I want to know what you want from me, directly, not around the edges. He looked at her for a moment. I want to find Colin Ashford and recover what he took, he said. You are the only person in this city with a genuine connection to him. Not a professional contact, not an associate, someone he lived alongside for over a year. You know things about him that he would not have considered dangerous because he did not think you were paying attention. I was not paying attention, she said. I thought I knew him. You knew more than you think. He stood, moved toward the window. I am also aware that you are in a precarious situation. The eviction notice, the empty account, a 3-day-old daughter and no support system. She felt something harden in her chest. How do you know about the eviction notice? He did not answer that directly. I know things about the people Colin touched, he said. I have been looking for him for 7 months. You were not on my list until yesterday morning. What are you proposing, she said. He looked at her with those dark eyes, steady and undeflected. Let me keep you safe, he said. Both of you. You stay somewhere secure until Colin is found. You tell me what you remember, whatever you remember. In exchange, you and Lily want for nothing, and when this is finished, you leave with enough to build an actual life. And if I refuse, then I will have someone watch your building anyway, because letting you walk around unprotected is a liability I cannot afford. But you will know you are being watched, and you will have none of the benefit that comes from accepting rather than refusing. He said it plainly, without threat in his tone, without any effort to make it sound like something other than what it was. I hate that this is the choice, she said. He nodded slightly. I understand. I need to think. Of course. He moved toward the door unhurried. You have until tonight. She looked down at Lily, still bundled in the carrier against her chest, sleeping through the entire thing with the absolute trust of someone who has no reason yet to believe the world is anything other than warm and held. Wait, Elena said. He paused with his hand on the door. My mother, she said. She left your family. She built something separate. Whatever world you come from, she chose to leave it. Why would I choose to walk into it? He was quiet for a moment. Because she had the luxury of choosing, he said. You have a 3-day-old daughter, an empty bank account, and people who entered your home last night while you were still in the hospital. Elena went very still. Last night, he said, 2 men with weapons entered your apartment. They were looking for something, My people intercepted them before they found anything. They were not working for me. He held her gaze. Your mother ran because she could. I am not asking you to stay. I am telling you that the running has already caught up and that standing still in the wrong place is not the same as safety. He opened the door. Call the number on the card by 9 tonight. Then he was gone. The door closed with a soft, expensive click, and Elena stood alone in the private dining room of Caldwell's with her daughter and the Chicago skyline spread out behind her and a silence that felt like the moment before a sentence changes everything. She looked out the window at the city, her city supposedly, the place she had lived her entire life, the streets where she had worked and saved and planned and been left behind. She looked down at Lily. What did I do? She whispered. Lily's eyes opened briefly, dark and unfocused. They found Elena's face anyway, by proximity and warmth, and something in that finding, in that instinctive turning toward her, settled the thing that had been spinning loose in Elena's chest. She straightened up. The bus home took 40 minutes. She sat in the back and held her daughter and did not look at her phone. She climbed the 4 flights. She stood in her apartment in the mildew smell and the inadequate heat, and she looked at the bassinet and the single duffel bag she had packed for the hospital and the eviction notice she had set on the counter because she had run out of places to put things she was not ready to deal with. She fed Lily, changed her, sat in the one comfortable chair and held her daughter against her chest and listened to the building settle around her. At 7:43 in the evening, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Dante Reeves' voice was the same as it had been in the restaurant, unhurried, undemanding, certain. The 2 men from last night, he said. They were hired by people looking for Colin through his known associations. You are a known association. They will send someone else. How long do I have? She said. Days, possibly. Maybe less. She looked at the window, at the street below, at the dark car idling at the curb that she had not noticed until just now and that she understood seeing it had been there for a while. She thought about her mother, about Rosalind Marsh, who had crossed an ocean and changed her name and built a careful distance between herself and something Elena had never been allowed to know about the fact that her mother had spent 30 years protecting her from a world she now needed that world to protect her from. She picked up the card from the counter. I have conditions, she said into the phone. Name them. Lily's safety is not negotiable. Whatever you need from me, whatever happens with Colin, she stays safe. That comes before everything else. Agreed. I am not a prisoner. If I decide I want to leave, I leave. A pause, shorter than she expected. When the threat is no longer active, you leave with everything I promised. You have my word on that, the word of someone in your position. He was quiet for a moment. Then I keep my word. That is the one thing I will not bargain with. She looked at Lily, at the street below, at the eviction notice on the counter. 1 hour, she said. Someone will be there in 1 hour. She hung up before she could second guess it. Then she set down the phone and began to pack. She did not take much. The duffel was already half filled from the hospital. She added clothes to Lily's things, the small stuffed rabbit from the baby shower her coworkers had organized in the diner break room between shifts. She took the photograph of her mother from the refrigerator door, the one from the year Elena turned 10. Her mother laughing at something outside the frame, the city behind her alive and certain. She took one last look at the apartment. 3 rooms on the 4th floor of a building that had been declining since before Elena arrived in it. Walls she had painted herself when she moved in a pale yellow that had come out slightly wrong. The window she had propped open every summer with a book because the latch was broken. The radiator that clanged awake every morning at 5. She had lived here for 4 years. She had thought it was temporary. She had thought a lot of things. She picked up Lily, picked up the bag, walked out the door. Downstairs, a woman was waiting, tall, precise, dressed in a dark suit that announced itself as expensive without being ornate. Her hair was deep auburn, pulled back without a strand displaced. Her face was composed in the particular way of someone who has disciplined themselves out of readable expression. Ms. Marsh, she said, I am Sable. I will be taking you to Mr. Reeves' residence. Her eyes moved to Lily and stayed there for a moment with something that might have been professional assessment and might have been something more human. Is it far? Elena asked. 40 minutes, Sable said. The car is here. She took Elena's bag without asking, turned and walked toward the entrance. Elena followed. Outside, the December air was sharp and clean, and the dark car at the curb was exactly the car she had seen from her window. The driver opened the door without being asked. Elena stood on the sidewalk for a moment, Lily against her chest. The building behind her, with its broken elevator and its wrong-colored walls, and the 4 years of careful survival it represented. Then she got in the car. The door closed. The city moved past the tinted windows, and Elena watched it go block by block. Neighborhood by neighborhood, her Chicago diminishing and then disappearing as they moved toward the highways, toward the lake, toward a world she had never seen, and a man she had met for 40 minutes, who had just made her a promise she had no evidence he would keep. She put her hand over Lily's small back and felt the rise and fall of her breathing, and told herself quietly and with more steadiness than she felt that she had made the right choice. The car moved north through the December dark. The estate appeared at the end of a private road lined with old oaks, their bare December branches reaching across the lane and interlocking overhead like the vaulted ceiling of something that had been standing long before anyone thought to call it architecture. The headlights moved through the tunnel of trees, and then the trees opened, and the house was there. It was not the size exactly, though the size was considerable, stone and glass spread across grounds that disappeared into darkness in every direction. It was the way the building sat in the landscape, with the particular settledness of something that has been in one place long enough to belong there. Lights glowed from the windows in warm amber. The car stopped at the front entrance. The air was colder here than in the city cleaners, carrying the smell of the lake and something organic soil and old wood. Elena held Lily against her chest and looked up at the house and thought briefly and without conclusion about her mother. Rosalind Marsh had left all of this, or something like it, the life adjacent to this kind of money, this kind of weight. She had left it at 24 and crossed an ocean and found an apartment on the north side of Chicago and spent the rest of her life making it enough. This way, Sable said, and Elena followed her inside. The foyer had marble floors and a chandelier that served no practical purpose, and every aesthetic one. Elena walked through it without stopping to look, because stopping to look would have meant acknowledging the full distance between this and the life she had left 3 hours ago, and she was not ready to do that math. A staircase. The second floor. Sable stopped at a set of double doors and opened them and stood aside. "You're sweet," she said. The sitting room was larger than her entire apartment. A fireplace occupied one wall already lit, casting moving light across furniture chosen for comfort rather than display. Beyond the sitting room was a bedroom with a bed dressed in linens that were the particular shade of white that comes from quality rather than bleach. To the right of the bedroom, through a door that stood partially open, warm light spilled from a room she had not yet seen. She crossed to it, pushed the door open fully. The nursery was complete. Not approximate, not assembled from whatever was available. Complete. A crib with clean lines and solid construction stood against the far wall, already made up with soft bedding. A changing table stocked with diapers and wipes and 3 different kinds of cream. Shelves holding blankets folded in precise squares, enclosed in graduated sizes. A glider in the corner, with a small table beside it at the exact right height. "We had it prepared this afternoon," Sable said from behind her. "Mr. Reeve was specific about the requirements. If anything is missing, let me know." Elena stood in the doorway of the nursery and did not speak for a moment. This afternoon. She had called him at 7:43. He had said 1 hour, which meant that when he said his people had prepared this, he meant it had been done before she agreed, before she called, in the window between when he left Caldwell's and when she made her decision. He had prepared for her saying yes while giving her the space to say no. She was not sure whether that was reassuring or the most unsettling thing she had encountered today, and the day had included quite a bit of competition for that distinction. "There are clothes in the closet for you as well," Sable said. "Sizes were estimated. Adjustments can be made. Dinner will come up at 7 unless you prefer the main dining room." "Up here," Elena said. "Please." "Of course." She paused. "Is there anything else you need tonight?" "Sleep," Elena said. "I just need to sleep." Sable nodded once and left, pulling the doors closed behind her, with a sound that was barely a sound at all. Elena stood in the middle of the suite with Lily still against her chest and the fire moving in the grate and the nursery glowing behind her, and all of it, every inch of it, feeling like a set constructed for someone else's life that she had accidentally walked into. She fed Lily, changed her, settled her in the crib with her hand on the small chest until the breathing steadied into sleep. Then she showered standing under water that was hotter than anything her apartment's pipes had ever managed, and let the heat work through the residual ache in her muscles and the tension that had taken up residence in her shoulders. Dinner arrived at 7. She ate without tasting it, sitting in the chair by the fire. She was asleep before 9. She woke to sunlight coming through curtains she did not remember closing, and a momentary complete blankness where memory should have been. Then it returned efficiently and without mercy. She checked the crib. Lily was there breathing steadily, small fists curled near her chin. Sable knocked at 8:30 with coffee and fruit, and the information that Mr. Reeve would be available when Elena was ready. No rush at her convenience in the first-floor office at the back of the house. Elena drank the coffee. It was extraordinary coffee, the kind she had served to other people for years and never purchased for herself. She changed into clothes from the closet. Jeans that fit as though they had been made for her, a soft gray sweater that cost more per thread than anything she had owned. She stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself in clothes that were not hers, and thought that this was either the beginning of something or the most elaborate trap she had ever walked into, and she did not yet know which. She strapped Lily into the carrier and went downstairs. A young man in a dark suit guided her through the house to a door near the back. He knocked once, waited, opened it. "Miss Marsh, sir." "Thank you, Marco." She stepped inside. The office was not what she had expected, not cold formal designed to announce authority through deliberate excess. Instead, the room was lived in. Dark wood shelves lined with books that had been read, spines creased, and pages marked not arranged for appearance, but used for content. A large desk stood to one side, but Dante was not behind it. He stood near the window, and the posture here was different from Caldwell's, less performed, more simply where he happened to be. He was wearing dark trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. Without the jacket, he looked slightly less constructed, which was only marginally less unsettling. He turned when she entered, and his eyes went immediately to Lily. "You slept," he said. "I did. And her." "Her name is Lily," Elena said again, gently but clearly. He absorbed this without reacting. "And Lily, she slept. She is fine." "Good." He moved toward the desk, putting space between them in a way she was beginning to recognize as deliberate. He was managing the geometry of the room, keeping himself at distances that did not crowd. Whether this was consideration or calculation, she could not yet determine. "I wanted to explain how things work here," he said. She waited. "You have access to the house and grounds. The staff will help with anything you need. There is a doctor on call for Lily who can come here if needed." He paused. "You are not confined. But I will ask you not to leave the property without telling me, not because I am restricting you, but because I need to know where you are in order to keep people around you." She looked at him. "And if I want to leave entirely, right now, could I?" His jaw moved slightly. "If you walked out the front door right now, my people would follow you. Not to stop you, to make sure no one else followed you first." He met her gaze. "That is not imprisonment. That is consequence. You are connected to someone who owes debts to people who do not accept non-payment gracefully. That does not end because you change addresses." She accepted this. Not happily. "You called me Elena," she said. "It is your name. You have been calling me Ms. Marsh." He looked at her steadily. "Would you prefer I continue?" "No," she said, surprising herself slightly. "Elena is fine." Something in his expression shifted by a fraction, something too small to measure but present. She sat down in one of the chairs without being invited because she was tired of waiting to be invited to things. "Tell me about my mother," she said. "Tell me what you know." He was quiet for a moment. Then he moved to the chair across from her and sat in it with the kind of economy that suggested he was thinking about what he was going to say before he said it. "Rosalind Reeve," he said. "She was my father's younger sister. She was 24 when she left. I was 7 years old." He paused. "I remember her clearly. She was the person in the family who asked questions, not to be difficult, but because she genuinely wanted to understand things. My father found this irritating. He found most things irritating that did not conform to his expectations." Elena listened. She witnessed something he said. "I will not describe it in detail. What I will say is that she saw my father make a decision that confirmed something she had suspected for a long time, that the world he was building was one she would not participate in regardless of the cost. She left within 2 weeks. She did not tell anyone she was going. She left a note for my father that he did not discuss ever with anyone. He looked at Elena. I read it once when I was 19. When I found it in his files, it said only, "I know what you are, and I cannot make my children into it." Elena sat very still. She did not have children when she left. Dante continued. You were born 4 years later. He paused. She was smarter than people gave her credit for. She built a distance that took me 7 years and considerable resources to partially reconstruct, and she did it alone without help, which is not an easy thing to do when you come from a family that considers information a form of currency. Elena thought about her mother, about the way she had always deflected questions about family, about the past, about Italy. Elena had interpreted this as grief, the specific grief of someone who had left something behind and found the remembering too painful. She had not considered that it might be something closer to vigilance. Near the end, Elena said, when the morphine made her confused, she said something in Italian. I had never heard her speak Italian, not once, not in 26 years. But she said something and I could not understand it. Dante looked at her. Il sangue chiama il sangue, Elena said. I looked it up afterward. Blood calls to blood. He was quiet, she knew, Elena said. She was protecting me her entire life from something she knew would eventually find me anyway. He did not offer comfort or confirmation. He simply sat with the weight of it, the way someone sits with something that has been true for a long time and does not require elaboration. She was brave, he said finally, and she was right to go. I am not my father, but the world she left is still the world I operate in, and she understood what that meant for the people in it. Elena looked at him. Are you telling me I should not trust you? I am telling you that you should trust me with your eyes open, he said. Not because you have decided I am safe, but because you have assessed the situation and determined that this is the best available position. That is different. That is useful. She thought about this. It is different, she agreed. The days that followed had the quality of a life held in suspension. Everything paused and waiting. The ordinary rhythms of feeding and sleeping and the small discoveries of a newborn continued while the larger situation arranged itself around them like weather. Elena moved through the house carefully at first, then with less carefulness as the geography became familiar. The library was on the ground floor, east wing, floor to ceiling, with books that had clearly been collected rather than curated for appearance. The kitchen was staffed in the mornings and available in the afternoons, and the person who ran it, a woman named Colette, who communicated primarily through the quality of what she produced, had figured out within 2 days exactly how Elena took her coffee and never asked again. Dante was present in the way that weather is present. You were aware of it without always seeing it directly. She would hear him in his office, the low, controlled cadence of phone conversations in English and occasionally in Italian. She would see him in the hallway sometimes moving with purpose, the men around him moving with the particular attention of people whose job was to occupy space correctly. He would nod to her. She would nod back. They were learning the architecture of proximity, where the edges were how close was too close. The second morning she came to breakfast to find him already there reading something on his phone, a cup of espresso at his elbow. He looked up when she entered with Lily in the carrier and moved his things to make room at the table. She sat. Colette appeared with coffee and then disappeared. Lily was awake and in the exploratory phase of morning wakefulness that Elena was beginning to recognize eyes moving across everything. She fixates on light sources, Elena said, not quite meaning to say it aloud, just at observing. Dante looked at Lily. He was watching her with that expression Elena kept returning to, that quality of recognition, like looking at something familiar, appearing in an unexpected place. She pulled a file toward her that he had left on the table, a contract for a commercial property acquisition, and scanned the first page. The liability clause, she said. It is structured to protect the seller from a specific category of risk that they are representing as your responsibility. If you sign this as written, you are accepting liability for environmental assessments that you have not commissioned. She paused. I waited tables for 6 years, but the diner was owned by a man who made me read every supplier contract before we signed it, because he said if I understood what we were agreeing to, I would be more careful about what we accepted. He took the file. Read the paragraph she had indicated. His expression did not change, but something in the quality of his attention shifted. "You are right," he said. "I know." He looked at her then with something new in it. Not surprise exactly, something that comes after surprise, the thing that follows when you recalibrate an assumption. That evening at dinner, she told him 3 more things she had noticed over the course of the day: a discrepancy in the staffing schedule that created a coverage gap in the south entrance between 6 and 7 in the morning, a problem with the heating system in her wing that was cycling inefficiently, and the fact that one of the men positioned outside her suite had been making calls on his personal phone during his shift. Dante listened to all of it. Then he said quietly, "You are not what I expected." She looked at him. "What did you expect?" He thought about this with the seriousness he appeared to bring to most things. "Someone more frightened," he said. "Someone who needed more managing." She picked up her fork. "I was frightened," she said. "I am still frightened. I have just found that frightened and functional are not mutually exclusive." He did not respond, but she could feel him thinking. The second week brought a change in the quality of the time, something slightly less suspended, slightly more like a version of actual life. Elena established routines. Lily was sleeping in longer stretches, 4 hours sometimes, and Elena used the quiet windows to read from the library, to walk the winter garden with a coat from the closet that fit exactly right, to sit in the glider in the nursery and think about things she did not yet have answers to. She thought about Colin constantly, the way you think about a wound you cannot stop touching. She thought about the 14 months and what had been real in them and what had been performance. She thought about the way he had held her hand across the kitchen table when she told him about the pregnancy, and whether there had been anything genuine in that moment, or whether it had been from the beginning one piece of a plan she had been too close to see. She did not yet know the answer to that. She was not sure she ever would. The night of the 11th day, she could not sleep. Lily had been fussy for 2 hours and had finally settled around midnight, and Elena had lain in the dark waiting for sleep that did not arrive. At 2 in the morning, she gave up, put on the robe from the closet, and went downstairs. The house was quiet in the way large houses are quiet, not silent, but ambient. She found her way to the library and pushed the door open and stopped. Dante was there. He was sitting in a leather chair near the fireplace with a glass of something amber in his hand and his eyes on the fire. No phone, no papers, just sitting, which was not something she had seen him do before. He looked up. She almost apologized and retreated. Something kept her in the doorway. "You hold your breath when you are trying to be quiet," he said. He did not say it unkindly, just as information. "I did not want to intrude." "You are not intruding." He gestured toward the other chair. She sat. The fire did most of the work for several minutes. "How is she?" he said. "Colicky tonight. The doctor said it is normal. It does not feel normal when you are the person listening to it. It will pass." "I know." She looked at the fire. "It does not help to know that while it is happening." He nodded. He understood this. She thought not necessarily about infants, but about the gap between knowing a thing and the knowing being useful. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He waited. "Your father, Antonio, what happened to him?" "He died 3 years ago," Dante said. "Heart attack." He said it with the flatness of someone who has processed a thing so thoroughly that the words no longer carry the weight the event once had. "And your mother?" "She died when I was young. 11." He looked at the fire. She was not part of the business. She was simply someone who had married into a situation she did not fully understand until it was too late to exit gracefully. "I am sorry," Elena said. He lifted one shoulder slightly. "It was the life. She made the best of it for as long as she could." He paused. "My father was not a cruel man in the conventional sense. He was not capricious or sadistic. He was simply someone for whom everything and everyone was ultimately instrumental. Everything existed in relation to what it could be used for." "That sounds lonely," Elena said. He looked at her then. "Yes," he said simply. "It was." She thought about what it would mean to grow up watching everything be reduced to utility, to learn that from the person who was supposed to show you what mattered. "I have people around me constantly," he said finally. "People who are loyal because I pay them, or because they are afraid of me, or because the alternative is worse." He looked at the fire. "Those are not the same as family. I know the difference. I have simply not had access to the difference for a very long time." She absorbed this. My mother never talked about any of this, she said. Not any of it. I grew up thinking her silence was grief. She took me to Italian restaurants twice, and both times she ordered in English and did not speak about the food. She was thorough, Dante said. There was something in it that might have been admiration. She was protecting me. Yes, and she was right to. He looked at Elena directly. I am not my father, but I would not ask you to simply take my word for that. What would you ask me to take? Timmy said. Evidence, the things that actually mean something. She looked at him in the firelight. This man who had upended her life with a photograph and a card on thick paper, who had prepared a nursery before she agreed to need one, who was sitting alone in his library at 2 in the morning with a glass of whiskey and no performance for an audience. She thought, I do not know you. She thought, I am beginning to. Cormac appeared at the office door 2 mornings later during a breakfast that had become, without formal decision, a shared one by one. He was built like someone who had spent a significant portion of his life in situations that required being built that way, broad through the shoulders, with a quality of stillness that was not relaxation but readiness. He communicated with Dante in a shorthand that suggested years of working proximity. He leaned in close to Dante and said something quiet. Dante's expression did not change, but the quality of his attention shifted completely. When he said, 48 hours ago, moving through the south corridor of the city, not leaving, looking for something. Elena set down her coffee cup. Both of them looked at her. That is Colin, she said. Is it not? Dante considered whether to confirm this and then decided not to waste time on performance. Yes. She thought about this. He has been in the city for 2 days and he is still here. He has not run, which means he is looking for something or someone. She looked at Dante. He thinks I went back to the apartment. He does not know I am here. We have kept it quiet, Cormac said. She looked at Dante. You were going to use the apartment as bait. A decoy, someone who looks like me from a distance. That was the initial approach, yes. She shook her head. It will not work. He looked at her with careful attention. Colin spent 14 months with me, she said. He knows how I carry myself. He knows the way I walk, the way I pause at the top of stairs out of habit. He knows details. He will recognize that someone is not me. Dante looked at Cormac, then back at Elena. What are you proposing? I go, she said. The quality of the silence that followed was different from other silences in that room. Absolutely not, Dante said. Elena had expected this. She kept her voice level. You need him to come to the apartment believing I have returned. The only way to guarantee that is if I am actually there. She paused. He took everything from me. My savings, my trust, 14 months of my life, and my daughter's chance at knowing her father is something other than a man who ran. She held Dante's gaze. This is the closest I will ever get to facing that. Do not take it from me. Dante looked at her for a long time. This is not your operation to run, he said. No, she said, but it is my life you are using to run it, and I am the only variable that makes it work. You know that. Cormac knows that. Cormac said nothing. He collected information and waited. Dante stood up from the table and walked to the window and stood there with his hands in his pockets. She will have a full perimeter, Cormac said from behind Dante. 2 entry positions and 4 exterior. She does not approach him. She draws him out. Dante turned from the window. He looked at Elena, at Lily and the carrier against her chest. Lily stays here, he said, with Sable, non-negotiable. Elena had already decided this. Yes, you follow every instruction Cormac gives you, every single one, without deviation and without argument. Understood. He held her gaze for another moment. Then he said, all right. Cormac began the logistics that afternoon. Elena sat in on the planning session, which she appeared in anyway, and from which she was not asked to leave. The apartment would be accessed from the same entry point Elena always used. Lights would run on a timer consistent with her former habits. Her specific movements through the apartment, the routes she habitually took, the windows she opened, and the ones she left closed. These had been documented from surveillance footage from the weeks before she went to the hospital. Elena absorbed the fact that she had been observed without her knowledge and filed it in the category of things she was choosing not to address until later. The plan was set for the following evening. That night late, Elena was in the nursery rocking Lily through a restless patch when she heard voices from the hallway. She recognized Dante's voice and a second voice She did not recognize older, with a rougher quality. The door was not quite closed. The second voice said, "The Alborough people have been in contact. They want a conversation about the Ashford situation. They are suggesting a mutual arrangement, information sharing." Dante's response was immediate. "No, they are offering significant consideration." The voice was careful, the kind of arrangement that does not come up often. "I understand what they are offering," Dante said. "The answer is no. The Albero organization has resources we do not currently have access to. This could resolve the situation faster." "At what cost?" Dante said. "Access to the Marsh situation. They want to know the woman's location, her connection to Ashford. They are suggesting she could be useful to them in establishing certain claims against Ashford's remaining assets." The silence that followed was brief and complete. When Dante spoke again, his voice was very quiet and very clear. "Elena Marsh and her daughter are not part of any negotiation with anyone," he said. "They are not a resource. They are not a piece of information to be exchanged. If the Albero people contact anyone connected to my organization again about this subject, I will consider it a statement of intent and respond accordingly. Is that clear?" A pause. "Yes," the voice said. "Then we are finished with this conversation." Footsteps. A door closing somewhere. Elena sat in the glider with Lily growing heavier against her shoulder, breathing steadily, now finally settled. The house was quiet again. She sat there for a long time. She thought about what she had heard, about what Dante had given up in that hallway, what the Albero arrangement might have meant for him, and what he had said without knowing she was listening. She turned it over and looked at it from every angle, the way you examine something you want to understand completely before you decide what it means. "He did not know I was here," she thought. "That is the only version of this that matters." Tomorrow she would walk back into her old apartment and stand in the space where her old life had happened and draw out the man who had taken it from her. Tonight she sat in the chair in the nursery and held her daughter and felt something she had not expected to feel. She felt in some way she could not yet fully articulate that she was not alone. The morning of the operation arrived the way difficult mornings always arrive, ordinary on the surface, light through the curtains, the smell of coffee from downstairs. Lily making the small waking sounds that had become the first event of every day. Elena lay still for a moment and listened to her daughter and let the ordinary details of the morning exist without rushing them. Then she got up. She fed Lily, changed her, held her for longer than the task required, standing at the nursery window and looking out at the winter garden. The frost-edged paths, the bare hedges, the sky above the lake, the color of old pewter. Lily's hand found Elena's finger and curled around it with the absolute grip of someone who does not yet know that holding on is something you have to learn to do deliberately. Sable knocked at 8. She held out her hands for Lily with a directness that was neither warm nor cold, simply competent. "She will be in the east sitting room," Sable said. "I will be with her the entire time." Elena transferred Lily carefully. Lily regarded Sable with the focused attention she brought to all new faces. "If anything changes," Elena said, "I will contact Mr. Reeve immediately," Sable said. "And you?" She met Elena's eyes. "She will be here when you get back." Elena looked at her daughter one more time, at the dark eyes and the curled fingers and the small, serious face that was beginning to show the first hints of expression. She kissed her forehead and walked out of the room before she could reconsider. Cormac was waiting in the hallway. He handed her a coat dark and unremarkable, and a small device that fit into the interior pocket. "Panic button," he said. "You press it. We move immediately." He looked at her with the directness of someone who has spent years communicating essential information efficiently. You do not engage with him. You do not speak to him beyond what is necessary to draw him close. You do not negotiate. You do not try to get answers. That is not what this is for. She understood. Dante was in the entryway when she came downstairs. He looked at her and she looked at him, and neither of them spoke for a moment. "You do not have to do this," he said. "I know," she said. "That is why I am doing it." He held her gaze for another moment. Then he nodded once and opened the door. The drive to her old neighborhood took 45 minutes in the morning traffic. Elena sat in the back of the car and watched the city assemble itself outside the windows, the architecture shifting in reverse, the wide streets narrowing, the glass towers giving way to brick, the manicured blocks becoming the familiar disorder of the north side. Her building appeared. She had not seen it in 2.5 weeks. It looked smaller than she remembered, which she knew was not true. The elevator was still broken. She climbed the 4 flights. The apartment smelled like she had left it, that particular combination of mildew and the specific brand of dish soap she used, and something underneath both of those that was simply the smell of a life lived in a small space. She stood inside the door for a moment and let herself feel what the space did to her now. It felt like somewhere she used to live. The transition had happened faster than she would have expected. She moved through the rooms the way Cormac had told her to, visible at the windows she normally used, staying back from the ones she normally avoided. She made coffee on the old machine that, grown through the brewing cycle, stood at the kitchen counter the way she had stood at it 1,000 times before, picked up the mail that had accumulated on the floor below the slot. Bills, more bills, a grocery circular, a card from the hospital with a follow-up appointment reminder. She set them on the counter and stood there and waited. Cormac's voice came through the earpiece she had almost forgotten was there. "He is in the building, ground floor, moving toward the stairs." Elena set down the mail. She breathed. She thought about the 14 months, about Sunday mornings and inside jokes, about the hand across the kitchen table, about the bank withdrawal timestamp at 6:47 in the morning. She thought about Lily, about the hand that curled around her finger that morning with absolute trust. She heard the footsteps on the stairs. He had always taken the stairs 2 at a time, and she heard that rhythm now. And it was exactly as she remembered, and the familiarity of it did something unexpected to her chest. Not softness, not grief, but the particular pain of recognizing something that has become alien, a thing that was once ordinary and is now evidence. The footsteps stopped outside the door. A pause. He was listening. Then the door opened. She had forgotten how he filled a room. Not physically, though he was not small. It was something about the quality of attention he projected, the sense of someone who had calibrated their presence to be noticed. He stood in the doorway and looked at her, and for one moment his expression was purely startled, a real thing, involuntary, and then it organized itself into something else. "Elena," he said. His voice was exactly as she remembered. That had been the most disorienting thing about all of it, how completely the voice had remained the same while everything attached to it became false. She looked at him. He was thinner. The confidence was still there, the way he stood, the way he met her eyes, but underneath it something new. A tension in the jaw, a quality of readiness. He was afraid. He was hiding it well, but she had spent 14 months learning the small tells of his face, and she could see it. "I did not think you would be here," he said. "I live here," she said. He looked around the apartment. His eyes were quick, checking corners, the window, the space behind the door. Professional habits she had watched him do 100 times and interpreted as caution or tidiness. She understood them now for what they were. "You look well," he said. "Considering." She said nothing. He moved into the room, not toward her, toward the window, the way people move when they want to appear casual and are in fact assessing exit options. "I want to explain," he said. She waited. "What happened?" he said. "I know you deserve an explanation. I know that the way things ended was wrong." His voice had the particular quality it had always had when he was making her feel like the most important person in a conversation. She had believed it for 14 months. She watched it now, like watching a technique. "I do not need an explanation," she said. "I need you to stand where you are." He looked at her. The door opened behind him. Cormac came in first, then 2 others. Colin turned fast enough that Elena understood he had been trained for this in some way, but it did not matter. There were 3 of them, and they knew what they were doing, and within 30 seconds, Colin Ashford was in a position from which he was not going anywhere. He looked at Elena over Cormac's shoulder. "You," he said. The warmth was gone entirely. What was underneath it was not anger, but a kind of cold assessment. He was already calculating. Cormac looked at Elena. "We have what we need," he said. She nodded once. She did not follow them out immediately. She stood in her apartment for another minute after they had gone, Colin's footsteps receding down the 4 flights. She looked at the pale yellow walls she had painted herself, the window propped with a book, the radiator that clanged at 5 in the morning. She had lived here for 4 years and built something careful inside these walls, and it had not been enough in the end to protect her from the thing that walked through the door. But she was still standing. She picked up her coat and walked out and did not look back. The basement of the Lake Forest estate was accessed through a door in the back corridor that Elena had passed a dozen times without registering as significant. Below the ground floor, there was a hallway concrete and lit with the practical fluorescence of a space not meant for guests. And off that hallway, several rooms, one of which had a steel door, and the quality of a space designed for conversations that did not leave it. Colin was in that room. Dante was already there when Elena arrived, standing near the wall with his arms crossed, and the expression he wore when he was doing the things she had noticed him do in difficult moments, containing something very large within a very controlled exterior. Cormac stood to one side, present but not speaking. He would be here when it was finished and gone when it was done. That was what she had come to understand about Cormac. Over the weeks, he was the person who ensured that outcomes occurred, and he did not require acknowledgement for it. Colin was seated, secured to the chair, and even now, even like this, he managed to sit as though the situation were temporary, an inconvenience he expected to resolve. He looked at Elena when she entered. "You have been busy," he said. She did not respond to this. Dante looked at her briefly, then at Colin. $2.1 million, Dante said. 7 months, 3 different identities. He said it the way you state established facts, no inflection, no question. "I want to know where it is." Colin looked at him with the measured attention of someone calculating odds. "And if I tell you, then we discuss what happens next." Colin smiled slightly, the smile of someone who has sat in rooms like this before and emerged from them. "She is the reason you found me," Colin said, looking at Elena. He said it without accusation, almost with interest, as though noting a variable he had underestimated. "I did not think you had the resources." "She did not find you," Dante said. "You found her." He paused. "That was the mistake." Colin absorbed this. Then his eyes moved back to Elena with a quality that she recognized, the voice he used when he was offering you something, making you feel like what he was saying was for your benefit. She had believed that voice for 14 months. She looked at it now like looking at a tool whose function she finally understood. "Has he told you," Colin said, "why he really brought you here? Not the protection story, the actual reason." Elena said nothing. "You are a useful piece," Colin continued. "The baby Lily, she carries his family name through you, which in his world means she carries a claim, a bloodline claim. Men like Dante Reeve do not have the kind of family that survives this business, and they end up alone eventually with no one who shares their blood, who is not also compromised by it. Then you appeared with a daughter who is technically his cousin's grandchild, which in the old structures means something." He looked at Elena with something that almost resembled concern. "He is not protecting you. He is collecting you." Elena looked at him. She thought about 14 months, about the kitchen table, about the timestamp. She thought about the nursery prepared before she agreed to come, about the contract paragraph she had caught that his lawyers had missed, and the way Dante had listened, about the library at 2 in the morning and the glass of whiskey, and the father who had treated everything as instrumental, about the hallway outside the nursery and the voice that did not know she was listening. They are not a resource. She looked at Colin for a long moment. "You spent 14 months with me," she said, "making me feel seen, making me feel like the most important thing in your field of attention." She kept her voice even. "And the whole time I was a means of access, a warm body you could stand next to while you moved through spaces you were not supposed to be in." She paused. "And now you are sitting in that chair trying to do the same thing with different material because it is the only move you have." Colin said nothing. "The difference," she said, "between you and him is that he does not need me to believe a performance." She felt the truth of it as she said it, not something she had prepared, but something that arrived fully formed. "I heard him last night when he did not know I was listening say that we are not part of any negotiation with anyone." She held Colin's gaze. "You have been performing for me since the first day. He has been doing the opposite. I watched both things happen, and I know the difference." The room was very quiet. Colin looked at her with the first expression she had seen from him that was not calculated, something that might have been under other circumstances respect. Then it closed off, and he looked at Dante. "The money," he said, "half of it is in an account in Luxembourg under a foundation name, Meridian Cultural Trust. The other half was liquidated and moved through 3 separate structures over 4 months. He provided account numbers, name sequences, with the efficiency of someone who had been carrying this information and had decided the carrying was no longer worth the cost. Dante took out his phone, passed the information to someone without leaving the room. Elena watched Colin's face while this happened, watched him do the math on what came next and reach conclusions about it. She had thought she would feel something specific in this moment, satisfaction or grief, or the particular relief of a chapter ending. What she felt instead was something quieter, a settling, like a weight she had been carrying redistributed itself into something more manageable. Is she actually yours? Colin said. He was looking at Dante. The baby, is she actually family or is that the story you told her? Dante looked at him. It is not a story, he said, but it is also not the point. Colin considered this. Then he looked at Elena one more time. I am sorry, he said. She waited to feel something at this. She checked carefully. What she found was that the apology existed in a category that no longer had much weight. Not because she was hard or because she had stopped being someone who could be hurt, because the person who had needed that apology had been replaced over the past 3 weeks by someone who had climbed 4 flights of stairs with a newborn and signed 43 forms alone and stood in a room with a dangerous man and negotiated her own terms. That person did not need Colin's apology. She had already moved past the place where it would have landed. Then she looked at Dante. There is something I need to do, she said, before this is finished. Something I need to say to him directly. Dante looked at her. Then he nodded once and stepped back, giving her the floor. She turned back to Colin. You told me once that you loved me, she said. I do not know if that was true, and I have decided it does not matter. What matters is that you made a choice. You chose a plan over a person. You chose money over a child you helped create. She paused. I spent weeks after you left trying to figure out what I had missed, what signs I had ignored, what it said about me that I had trusted you. She kept her voice steady. It said nothing about me. It said everything about you. And I am done carrying that. She stepped back. She turned to Cormac. We are finished here, she said. Cormac nodded. She walked out of the room, and this time she did not look back at all. Dante found her 20 minutes later in the sitting room on the ground floor, the one that faced east where the morning light came through first, and the grounds beyond the windows were visible all the way to the tree line. She was standing there with her arms crossed and her eyes somewhere in the middle distance, not looking at the garden, particularly just needing to be somewhere that had an open view. She heard him come in. She turned. The accounts are being accessed, he said. It will take some time to fully recover, but the structure is clear. She nodded. He crossed to where she stood and stopped beside her at the kind of distance he maintained considerate and careful. I heard you last night, she said. In the hallway outside the nursery, the conversation about Albero. He was quiet. You did not know I was there, she said. No, she turned to look at him. I needed to know the difference, she said, between what someone does when they know they are being watched and what they do when they think no one is looking. That is the only version of a person that is actually true. He met her eyes, and he said, and I know the difference, she said. I have known it for a while. I just needed to hear it directly without any possibility of performance. He did not move, did not reach for her or close the distance or do any of the things she might have expected. He simply stood beside her and looked at her with those dark eyes that she had once found only frightening and had come to find over the course of 3 weeks in a house that was not hers. Something considerably more complicated than that. I want to stay, she said. Not because I have nowhere else to go. I want you to understand that distinction. I am choosing this. I understand the distinction, he said quietly. And I want it to be real, she said. Not managed, not a negotiation about terms and what I owe you for protection rendered. She held his gaze. I want to actually build something with Lily, with whatever this is between us, even if I do not yet have a name for it. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I have been alone in this house for 11 years, not because I chose it, because I could not find a way to have something real alongside what I do. He paused. You walked into a restaurant with a 3-day-old daughter and a list of conditions, and you caught a contract error my lawyers had missed. He held her gaze. I do not want to manage this. I want to find out what it actually is. She looked at him. Then she said, on my terms, at my pace, he nodded, without hesitation. No other way, he said. She turned back to the view. After a moment, he turned to face it as well, and they stood side by side at the window in the pale December light and looked at the frost and the bare branches and the sky that had gone from pewter to a washed thin blue over the course of the morning. Sable appeared in the doorway. "Lily is awake," she said. "She is making her feelings known." Elena was already moving toward the door. She found Lily in the east sitting room, red-faced and working herself toward genuine outrage, with the focused determination that Elena had come to recognize as her daughter's primary mode of communication when she felt her needs were not being addressed with sufficient urgency. She picked her up. Lily stopped immediately, not because anything had been resolved yet, but because being held was for now resolution enough. She pressed her face into Elena's neck and made the small sound that meant she had found what she was looking for. "I know," Elena said into the dark hair. "I know. I am here." She carried Lily to the window and stood there for a long moment, looking out at the long driveway lined with oaks, the trees she had passed through on her first night here. She thought about her mother standing at different windows in different cities, holding different worries, building the distance that was supposed to protect Elena from this. She thought about what it cost to run from something. The perpetual maintenance of it, the way you had to keep rebuilding the walls because the walls did not maintain themselves. She thought about what it cost to stop running. She thought it might be less. In the months that followed, the house changed. Not its structure, but its quality, the way a room changes when it becomes lived in rather than occupied. Lily grew with the aggressive speed of infants, visibly different, week to week, heavier and more alert and more vocal about the things she found interesting and the things she found insufficient. She developed opinions about the mobile above her crib and the specific blanket she preferred. She developed opinions about Dante. It announced itself on a morning in February when he came into the kitchen while Elena was having coffee and Lily was in the bouncy seat on the counter. Lily tracked him across the room with the particular focus she reserved for things that interested her, and then when he stopped and looked at her, produced an expression that was definitively a smile. Her first deliberate one. Dante stopped completely. He stood very still as though the motion in any direction might end it, and he looked at this small person who had just decided, apparently without consultation, that he was worth smiling at, and something in his face did something Elena had not seen it do before. It opened. "She has never done that before," Elena said. He did not respond immediately. He was still looking at Lily, who had moved on with the attention span of someone with several weeks of accumulated life experience and was now examining her own hand. "She did it now," he said. His voice was different, not a performance, not the controlled, managed tone of someone navigating a situation, just a voice. Elena looked at the two of them, this man and her daughter, and thought about what her mother had tried to protect her from and what she had found instead. Dante looked up and found Elena watching him and did not look away. Spring arrived in this way Chicago springs arrive abruptly and with the particular relief of something overdue. The garden broke into green in April with a speed that felt almost aggressive after the long flat months of winter. Elena started taking Lily out in the mornings, long walks through the grounds, while the dew was still on the grass, both of them in the fresh air that smelled like soil waking up. She had taken on more of the legitimate business work by then, formally with a role that had been defined after 3 months of doing it informally, and Dante's legal team drawing up an arrangement that gave her something official to stand in. She was good at it. She had always been good at reading people and reading situations, at understanding the architecture of a room from what people were not saying as much as from what they were. These were skills that transferred. She sat in on meetings sometimes, offered input, was listened to. She was not naive about what surrounded the legitimate structures, about what Dante was and what his world was. She had not pretended to herself that these things were separate, but she had also come to understand that most things people assumed were binary were more accurately spectrums, and that where you chose to stand mattered even when you could not control what was adjacent to you. One evening in late April, a Thursday, Dante came to find her in the library after Lily had gone to sleep. She was in the chair by the window with a book she was not really reading. He sat in the chair across from her. "I want to show you something," he said. He handed her a folder. Inside were documents, legal language she scanned quickly. A charitable foundation, education focused. The Rosalind Marsh Foundation, she read. She looked up. Your mother built something from nothing, he said. She educated herself, built a career, raised a child alone in a city that was not her own. He met her eyes. I thought she deserved to have something named for what she did, something that does what she did for other people who need it. Elena looked at the documents for a long moment. She thought about her mother, about Rosalind Reeve, who became Rosalind Marsh, who came to Chicago and built a life and protected a daughter, and died in a hospital bed talking in a language she had spent 30 years not speaking. About the things you carry and the things you put down and the difference between the two. She closed the folder carefully. You did not tell me you were going to do this, she said. I wanted to see your face when you read it. She looked at him. She thought she had a fairly accurate picture of who he was by now. Not complete, not without questions remaining, but accurate enough to navigate by. She thought the picture was a good one, meaning not that it was simple or without shadow, but that it was true, which was the thing she had decided she cared about more than simple. She stood up and crossed to his chair and sat on the arm of it and looked at him from that new angle. He looked back at her. She kissed him. Not dramatically, not with the weight of everything that had led to it, though. Everything that had led to it was present in the room. Just directly the way you do a thing you have decided to do, and he was very still for a moment, and then he was not still at all, and his hand came up to her face with a gentleness she had not expected from those hands. When she pulled back, he was looking at her with those dark eyes in the lamplight of the library, and his hand was still against her cheek, and the garden was dark outside the window, and the house was quiet, and Lily was asleep upstairs. It was by any measure an ordinary Thursday evening in late April in a house in Lake Forest, Illinois. It was also the first night of something she did not yet have a name for. The summer arrived and Lily became a person with preferences and a laugh that surprised her with its volume every time it emerged. She developed a particular attachment to Dante that expressed itself in her, tracking him across any room he entered and making sounds of protest when he left. He bore this attachment with the seriousness he brought to important things. He learned the specific way she liked to be held, the angle and the motion. He learned that the Italian words he murmured when he thought no one was listening made her go still in the interested way, the cataloging way, like she was filing the sounds for later use. He called her Piccola, little one. Elena did not comment on this. She thought her mother somewhere might have smiled. On a morning in July, 7 months after Elena had stood at the nursery window of St. Catherine's Hospital, with her forehead against the glass, she stood at the kitchen counter with a cup of pinfamoi and looked out through the open door to the garden. Dante was walking the grounds with Lily in his arms. He was talking to her. His head bent close to hers, the one-sided conversation of someone who understands that the words are not the point, that the voice is the point, that being spoken to as though you matter is the first lesson anyone teaches a person about what they are worth. Lily had her hand fisted in the collar of his shirt. Elena watched this and felt the thing she had been feeling for several months now settle into something she no longer needed to examine before naming it. She put down her coffee and walked out into the July morning. Dante heard her and turned. Lily heard her and reached for her, and Elena took her and held both of them in the easy geometry of a morning that belonged to no category she had previously known. My mother spent her whole life running from this name, she said. She said it quietly, not to Dante, specifically to the garden, to whatever version of her mother might be listening somewhere in the warm July air. Dante stood beside her. She ran a long way, he said. She did, Elena agreed, and she was right too for herself for what her life needed to be. She looked at Lily, at the dark eyes that were every day becoming more fully themselves, more present, more the person she was going to be. She just could not run far enough to keep it from finding me. He put his hand on Lily's back, his and Elena's hands resting there together, and he said nothing. He did not need to say anything. The garden was bright. The oaks at the end of the drive were full and green. Somewhere in the hedges, a bird was making a sound that meant it had found what it was looking for. Elena stood in the July morning with her daughter and the man she had been afraid of and had come to know and had chosen. And she thought about what her mother had said in a language she spent 30 years not speaking, the sentence Elena had looked up in a hospital hallway on a dying phone and carried quietly ever since. Blood calls to blood. It had called across an ocean and through 30 years of careful distance and through a wrong number sent with shaking hands in a corridor at 4% battery. And what it had called her to was not the danger her mother had spent a lifetime trying to outrun. It was this morning, this man, this daughter who had her fist in a collar and her face turned toward the sun. Her mother had made one choice. Elena had made another. She did not think her mother was wrong. She thought the difference was that Elena had been able to see what was actually there, not what history said should be there, not what the structure suggested, but the actual person who had turned from a window and said, "Come in," who had prepared a room before he knew the answer, who had said they are not part of any negotiation to a man offering him things he needed. She had found the difference between the world her mother fled and the man standing beside her now. They were not the same thing. They had never been the same thing. She just had to walk into a restaurant on a December afternoon with a 3-day-old daughter and a list of conditions to find that out. The bird in the hedges went quiet for a moment and then started again, more certain than before. Elena held her daughter against her chest and felt the summer on her face and chose as she had been choosing every morning for 7 months now to stay. Who